Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I am your Innkeeper Vase Odin, and today we will be reviewing Undimensioned and Unseen. After saving, or losing, their friends and acquaintances to ritualistic sacrifice and finding a horrific secret within the village of Dunwich, the investigators search the Whately Manor for answers. But it isn't long before more trouble finds them. The townsfolk scream about invisible creatures returning to wreak havoc on the town, and it's up to the investigators to do something about it. The creatures are difficult to find and are impervious to mortal weapons, but they were defeated once, and that means the secret to defeating them again is somewhere in Dunwich. Undimensioned and Unseen is a scenario made to balance the scales of the campaign. What I mean is that it becomes much more difficult the better you fared in the previous one. Personally, I was initially a tad annoyed by this, but when I understood what the purpose was, I didn't mind it as much. Unfortunately, you do have to add another basic weakness to your deck at the start of the scenario, which adds to its difficulty. Right from the start, the scenario makes it clear that you're hunting creatures that see you as insignificant. They move about randomly, even on the very first turn of the game, and they seem to ignore whatever you throw at them. This isn't uncalled for, though, because the creatures are immune to normal attacks. Surprisingly, the broods are not elite. This means that certain cards you normally can't use against bosses work on these guys. Cards like anatomical diagrams. The weapon you find in the scenario is helpful, but dealing 1 point of damage to creatures with potentially 5 or more health is very action intensive. Add in the fact that they move every round, and you're going to be spending several turns just taking down one of these guys. This sounds fun, but at one point we had 4 or 5 of these guys around at once, and trust me, I was pulling my hairs out of my head out of frustration. I quickly learned I could use the locations in this scenario for tactical advantages, but even with that, it was overwhelmingly challenging. Overall, I felt the mechanics worked well to invoke the feeling of having to hunt these very powerful creatures. The difficulty is very high, but luckily there is a resign option allowing you to do your best and then get out. Although the encounter deck works very well as intended, I felt it didn't need to increase the power level of the creatures. There's a potential for the creatures to become hilariously difficult to fight and defeat, and throwing the whippoorwill set that makes it even more difficult to defeat them, and you have a recipe for disaster. I am sounding a bit harsh here, but despite my feeling that this is a bad part of the scenario, it isn't my biggest gripe with it. In fact, those are minor gripes. The biggest miss here is the lack of character for the scenario. The broods are all the same, and some variants could have gone a long way. Also, where are the panicking townsfolk? I think the lack of any mechanical or story-driven description of the destruction and mayhem, or potential townsfolk casualties, makes this scenario feel like you're in an abandoned village when you hunt these creatures. Maybe even some art on the cards would have helped change this. The feel of it is very bleak and lonely for me, and not in a good way. I guess in a way, what I'm trying to say is that the story seems pretty bland. I think this is also partly due to the scenario already starting with a threat that just gets bigger with time, and the only 2 chapters are find the formula and kill the things. Compared to Essex County Essex County Express, where you begin on a train when strange things begin to happen, then after a bit you realize the train is being sucked into another dimension, and then you realize you can get away by taking control in the engine. So the story actually has some movement. You can even compare it to House Always Wins, where you begin as an undercover investigator, then your cover is blown, and then suddenly creatures bust in and you're racing to find the person you're looking for and get out. This one just feels like the start and finish are pretty much the same, so the story doesn't really go anywhere. Hunt the creatures and kill them. That's really it. One last thing. Balancing the campaign, some people had a gripe with that. I personally thought it was a good thing to adjust the difficulty on the other end of the spectrum. So if you did well the previous scenario, this one is tougher. If you did poorly the previous scenario, this scenario doesn't beat you down further by making it more difficult. It actually makes it easier, so you can kind of catch your breath and catch up a little bit in the campaign. So I thought it was a good thing overall. Overall, I give this scenario 3 mental trauma for mechanics and 1 mental trauma for story. I guess I don't really need to say this, but for those who haven't figured it out, this is one of my least favorite scenarios. I hope you found this review helpful. I would love to hear what you think about Undimensioned and Unseen. Do you agree with my assessment, or am I way off base? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Down there. Thank you for listening. I'm Innkeeper Vase Odin. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then.